Hey there, this is Jeff Cobb here to talk about the pros and cons of microlearning, that form of learning that, as the name suggests, is much briefer than the traditional course or conference session. So I'm going to talk about 10 pros, because I think there are quite a few pros to microlearning, and also 3 big cons to keep in mind as your organization is considering whether to embrace microlearning. So, the first big pro is simply that microlearning fits well into busy lifestyles. Our members and learners are much more time challenged than ever, and if you can provide something that's short but also applicable, they're going to appreciate it. It can also provide a quicker path to relevance, so they can get at the stuff that they really care about most, the stuff that's most relevant to them when it comes to their learning. Number 3, it can support priming and leveling before another type of learning event. So what I mean by this is you can prime people by providing content that helps to provoke thought and discussion coming into the event. And you can level the knowledge in the room by having the entire group read a common piece of content or view a common piece of content before showing up. Number 4, microlearning can provide reinforcement and supplement learning as it's going on. So you may discuss something in the context of a traditional course and then provide a brief piece of content that helps to reinforce the point that was made. Microlearning helps to support reflection as well as reinforcement of learning after the fact. So after that traditional course, after that traditional webinar, whatever it is, you can provide microlearning as a way to go back and reflect on the major elements of the learning, to repeat some things that need to be repeated, to reinforce the main points. And all of this also fits in with the concept of spaced learning. So spacing out the exposure to new skills, new knowledge, new content, having learners engage with it again is going to be much more effective in reinforcing the learning and being sure that the learners retain it over time. Number 6, microlearning can provide for social learning objects. So think here, for example, of your online community or any sort of community that you're running. If you want people to engage with each other, they typically need an object of engagement, something to discuss, something to react to. Microlearning can provide that kind of social learning object to help really catalyze your learning communities. Number 7, thinking primarily from the organizational perspective, microlearning is relatively low effort and relatively low cost to produce. So in terms of creating content, you can do that quite easily. I'm just using my Mac with the built-in camera and a simple piece of software called ScreenFlow to put together this presentation right now. Number 8, it can help you to leverage your subject matter experts. So you might think of setting up a video camera at your next conference, for example, and ahead of time recruiting, half a dozen, whatever the number is, of people who can talk briefly, 5, 10, 15 minutes on some of the topics that are most relevant in your field or industry right now and capture that content. It's a great way to leverage the knowledge that's out in your base. Doing that, of course, can support new business models, number 9 here. So let's say you put together a series of those types of videos. In this instance, you can make that a subscription series and charge for it, or make it part of your membership benefit package. And then finally, number 10 is that microlearning really opens up mobile and social as channels for you. You can access most microlearning content on the average cell phone, the average smartphone these days, and within your social networks. Again, this is the idea of the learning object, the object of engagement, on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. These provide the types of content that people can react to and discuss, and that you can create some buzz about even as you're feeding the learning within your field or industry. So those are some of the big pros, and there are others. Those are just the ones that are top of mind for me right now. But I do also want to discuss some significant cons that can come along with microlearning. Now, the first of these is that by creating microlearning and putting it out there, it's possible that you can just create noise. Learners want brief content, but they don't necessarily need more content if it's not relevant to them. So you have to make sure it's relevant. Number 2 is that microlearning may be too brief to support learning goals. You have to think about instructional design. You have to think about the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And microlearning content may not be the right method. You may need discussion. You may need other approaches. But again, microlearning may be a supplement. You just simply have to determine when it's going to be right and not misuse it. Finally, I talked about microlearning being relatively easy and low cost from a content standpoint, but it does require some effort often to establish context. If you just throw a single video or a document out there without really providing the framework for it, the other content that it's going to relate to, the overall picture into which it fits, then we're back to number one again. It may just be noise. So putting that effort into context is something that organizations may not put enough thought into sometimes when they're thinking about getting into microlearning, and you do have to consider that as an issue. So that's just a brief rundown of some of the major pros and cons of microlearning. If you'd like some additional support on your microlearning efforts, we've got a resource page at tagoras.com/microlearning. And I'd love to hear about your own efforts with microlearning. Feel free to drop me a line at the email address or phone number on the screen here. And in the meantime, I hope you found this helpful, and best of luck with your microlearning efforts.